Welcome to today's Stages workshop, mini partner workshop. Today we're joined by Jason Pinchback from the Texas General Land Office. And so with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jason.
Sure thing. Hey, hello, good morning. My name is Jason Pinchback. Work at the Texas General Land Office and am the Water Resources Manager for the agency. And I'm waiting to see if I can get a slide to advance here. So let's just, might be thinking really hard. I'm going to hang out for a sec until the computer decides to function. Aha, there we go. All right, looks like it's on and ready. Woke up. Let me feed it some more caffeine real quick. Excited to talk with you all today about our Texas Beach Watch program and our quest to learn more about the characterization, causal factors, and ways to resolve and eliminate some of the fecal pollution that we've been experiencing. My silent and not participating partner in crime is Lucy Flores. She's been working with me and on the team for about 10 years now, and she's instrumental in the program operations for Beach Watch and our studies. Today, we're going to do a very brief overview of Texas Beach Watch, talk about fecal indicator bacteria, look at some studies and trends, and talk about some lessons learned. And I'm just going to admit to you right at the front, I'll have a couple of answers, but I have a lot more questions than answers as we attempt to go through kind of like the cowboy in the background and to wrangle bacteria along the coastline. I would like to acknowledge a huge group of teams before getting going. That this includes folks from both the General Land Office, our Texas Beach Watch field staff, and then numerous staff there at Texas A&M Corpus Christi have been instrumental in helping us to learn more, as well as some of our program partners and our networked collaboration with the Clean Coast Texas program, which is working with communities to resolve some of these issues, as well as some of our other state agency partners. We're nothing without this network of folks. We really appreciate your partnership. So the Texas Beach Watch program operates along all coastal beaches that are heavily used by contact recreation. We monitor water quality for a fecal indicator bacteria called Enterococcus. And when this bacteria is present in the water, it indicates the presence of other fecal pathogens, viruses, bacteria, protozoa, etc. This is part of a larger effort, which is nationwide under the Beach Act, passed in 2000. And the General Land Office has been the main operator of Texas Beach Watch. We have 172 sites at 61 recreational beaches. As you see in the left here, each of the different colored symbols indicates a specific monitoring location. The legend specific to this map you're looking at here is red is a beach advisory, and a beach advisory is posted when the observed bacteria level in Enterococcus exceeds 104 colony forming units per 100 mil. And most of these, just showing here in the screenshot, just captured mostly good conditions across the coast. So we co-authored a study several years back with Dr. Nicole Powers out of Texas A&M. She's currently working with HRI and maybe others. And a couple of takeaways from the study were that we had increasing bacterial levels over time. They're correlated with population growth. They're also correlated with increases in sea level rise. So we've had a number of instances in which there have been elevated bacteria levels over time, coupled with the study results. It really helped to gain and garner interest and support for doing some additional analysis and studies. And so we have formed several different strategic partnerships with Texas A&M College Station, with the research team there. Terry Gentry is a microbiologist there. Gabriele Bonatti is our main analyst. We also have partnerships with researchers and staff, faculty at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. For instance, Dr. Dorina Morgulette, Dave Felix. I'm drawing blanks right now, apparently, but there's a whole lot of folks, Mike Wetz, Nicole Powers, quite a few folks. You have a powerhouse of resources there at your own institution. But we've partnered up with these folks because, quite frankly, you're a lot smarter than us, and you help us to understand some of the intricacies of the data and the observations that we've been making. So we're asking questions. How do beach areas compare to each other? When we look at a beach segment or something that might be homogeneous, when we look at the various sites, we do intra-site comparisons where we look at, are there particular hotspots or areas that stand out? Are there specific relationships with rainfall, temp, and salinity that can be established, or other variables? And of course, we're looking at microbial source tracking, bacterial source tracking, and then doing some old-fashioned boots on the ground work as well. I'm going to show you a couple of snapshots, but I want to orient you to what you're going to see. And so this is the first piece of the graph here to understand is you're going to see some colors in a minute. And we have a secondary set of threshold data that we use for early detection. And so the data have separated themselves out, and you'll see the separation here where we're calling anything greater than high when over the period of record, which is 2010 to 2023, about 13 years, when we have greater than 10% exceedances of the beach action value. And then we have a medium and then a low category as well. It's important to differentiate these categories of exceedances from how the state of Texas looks at recreation impairment based on a regulatory standard, which they look at a body of evidence, roughly the samples collected within the beach segment over a 5 to 7 year period, depending on the data of record. And that threshold is 1 out of 4, or 25%. So at a particular site or beach segment, when greater than 25% of the data over that 5-year period exceed the beach action value, then it is deemed to be impaired for contact recreation, officially by the state of Texas, made its way to the 303D list. The next thing I want to orient you to is the geography. So when you see the data in a minute, on the left-hand side is South Texas. Here, Mexico would be over here, Cameron County, South Padre Island, if you're into that. Your neck of the woods, the Nueces Coastal Bend area, will be located in here on the graph. And we move up the coast, San Patricio, Matagorda, Brazoria, Galveston, Harrison, Jefferson. So we basically sample all the peak use recreational beaches between Louisiana and Mexico. All right, so here's the data. And earlier I talked about this, how the data have separated themselves out. And so we've just taken a cue from the data. The data kind of showed us what to do. And so what we see here on the left-hand side, or in far South Texas, we see Cameron County with some of the best water quality in the state. At some sites having minimal, maybe 1% or less exceedances of the beach action value. This is out of the mouth of the Rio Grande, capturing some of the mixed-use watershed right there. So this is out of Boca Chica Beach, Rio Grande. We're catching Rio Grande flows there. And then we move into Nueces County. And I failed to mention what this line is right here. On the right-hand side, we have colony forming units. The highest we can measure is 24,196. So when you see these peak out, it doesn't mean they weren't higher than that. That's just the maximum analytical value. So you do see we touch these from time to time at a couple of the Nueces beachfront sites, but Nueces Gulf side beaches are showing relatively good water quality, although they're a mixed bag to some degree. But then we move over to Coal Ropes, Ponish, Corpus Christi Bay sites where we have some excessive bacteria observations occurring here. We actually have several impaired sites, Coal Ropes, Ponish, maybe some other locations. Then we move up the coast just a little bit, and we'll be looking at some of the areas north of Packery Channel in this area, as well as Port Aransas and Mustang Beach. As we move up the coast, we have Aransas County, a couple of sites in Aransas County, and then two areas of much higher bacteria observation here in Matagorda. This is near the mouth of the Colorado and the city of Palacios, Texas. And then we have Matagorda Gulf facing beaches. An unusual occurrence has happened here within the last couple of years where we have several beach sites that have actually met and exceeded the minimal criteria for contact recreation. And those are also now listed as impaired on the 3 to 3D list. And as we move into Brazoria County, you see the levels relatively low again. These are all Gulf fronting sites in here. All the sites are Gulf fronting except for this little batch up top. You can see my cursor moving around, Palacios, Bayside, and then Sylvan Beach over in Harris County, Bayside. So you definitely see a little bit of a trend happening where we do have more elevated values in the bays versus the Gulf. And that also plays out in long-term statistics that they are significantly different data sets, behaving different than each other. And there are many reasons for that. Proximity of land use, but more than likely it has to do specifically with the amount of energy in each of the systems, i.e. Gulf running beaches and the wave action chewing up the bacteria and diluting it out relatively quickly versus maybe a longer residency time occurring bayside. Getting back into our tour, this is still in Brazoria, and then we move into Galveston Island, starting right here. This would be on the far west end. Then we move across Galveston, and then the seawall would be located in this area here. Then we move over into Bolivar, where we do have a couple of areas of elevated bacteria in Bolivar Peninsula. We do have these two sites in Harris County. This is a really interesting and complex and quite intimidating scenario there. Right near the mouth of the San Jacinto, in the heart of a very interesting mixed-use residential and industrial area. Then we move up the coast to Jefferson County, and this is mainly around Searim State Park and McFadden National Wildlife Area. So the state, in essence, is bookended on the right, or the most upper coast area with Jefferson County, competing with Cameron County for the best water quality in the state of Texas. Then you see a mixed bag with Gulf fronting sites behaving more appropriate according to the standards. But it's still a mixed bag in various areas, depending on where you're at with these Gulf facing sites, as well as their responsiveness to rainwater and other environmental conditions. And that is your water quality tour of the state of Texas. That was a 13-year data set. So next, I would just like to talk a little bit about intra-site comparisons. And so we're doing big data. And so the last snapshot was to kind of give some insights and ideas about the big picture of what's going on with water quality data across the state. And then when we dig in and we look at the finer points of statistical analysis and helping us to understand which sites based on the data are actually differentiating themselves, and we're looking for the squeaky wheel here, which sites are actually showing potential problematic, whether it is just a straight, what's the geomean difference, or do we have increasing trends over time or decreasing trends over time or neutral? And so we asked a lot of different questions of the data, including responsiveness to rainfall, changes in salinity, pH, temperature, etc. And so we use this type of approach, for instance, when we're looking at a specific system such as Galveston Island here, and the 13-year data set analysis here. This is information provided by Gabriele Bonatti, Texas A&M College Station, AgriLife Extension. And so he helped us to tease out and to understand really what's going on with a couple of sites of interest on Bolivar. The site here, Texas City Dike. This is along the seawall with this high value here, and this is by the state park. over here. So we started digging into some of these sites and doing some additional investigation. So it often you heard the saying needle in a haystack, and so what we need to do first is we need to find the haystack before we can hunt for the needle. And so what this type of analysis enables us to do is to designate specific areas of geography as performing different than other areas. And so that in essence is the location of the haystack in which we then do finer, more robust, whether it's data collection, data analytics, or boots on the ground investigation. And when I say boots on the ground, it's nothing sophisticated. We're talking about walking around, biking around, literally driving around areas, and searching for something that might stand out and look obvious, even though it may not smell like sewage or look like sewage. Why is there water running out of a gutter when it hasn't rained in 2 weeks? Just asking some kind of common sense questions at that point. So you have to ask, okay, where is the bacteria source coming from? And so in essence, if it has hair, fur, feathers, and you can throw dolphins and some other miscellaneous animals in there as well, but it's going to be more likely one of the culprits here. And birds, seagulls are quite prevalent in our source tracking, along with the dogs, the canine, with some human being observed. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. So what this is this is, instead of another graph, we've got a proportional representation of preliminary source tracking results. And so you're seeing a lot more dog on here and a lot more gold than you are humans or cows. And often, folks were quick to point the finger at maybe the agricultural community or something like that. That really hasn't panned out in the data anyways, but we have predominant hits on canine, gull, coyote, and then with some human. The vastness of our species that we've been sampling is relatively small as well, so this is indicative of that type of an approach. Source tracking has been fantastic. It's helped us to understand some things, but it's also very complex in trying to understand the data. And sometimes the source tracking data do not jive with other pieces of data. For instance, Dr. Morgulette and her team have installed drinking water, monitoring wells in coastal fronting areas along the Gulf Coast beach. This has been testing a hypothesis specific to understanding septic system, possible transference of partially treated or untreated sewage into the Gulf fronting beaches. And so this particular depiction here, thanks AI for ginning this one up. And so this is a depiction of what Dr. Morgulette and her team have done. And Cody, I bet you're probably laughing if you're listening right now. You're probably the one doing a lot of this, so thank you for that work. So here we have a depiction of a PVC pipe placed into the ground in close proximity to a public restroom that is on septic for this example here, tapped into the shallow groundwater table, where samples were extracted from the shallow groundwater table and analyzed for water chemistry, as well as microbiology and Enterococcus, as well as source tracking. The study is much larger than that. They've also been doing similar sampling in the actual Gulf front beaches themselves, where they've been collecting samples from just underneath the surface, pore water sample, water column samples, and a little bit of mixed bag, all of the above. So one thing that has been confounding with the data, where just kind of like put it plainly, the math ain't mathing, and where Dr. Felix's water chemistry analysis is showing signatures of high sewage or high wastewater contamination. But oddly enough, the source tracking results from the shallow groundwater table are predominantly showing seagulls, canine, and coyote with only some human. This isn't making sense to me, and I haven't seen a solid explanation as to why this might be the case, other than um, seagull and canine, the DNA and the sources can remain viable for weeks, whereas human viability for detection could possibly be only 24 to 48 hours. Um, Maybe we're blinded by bias on this one. I don't know. We still need to collect a lot more information to understand what's going on. Dr. Morgulette might be able to shed some light on that later on as well. But the source tracking and the water chemistry just aren't adding up yet. And I look forward to gaining more insights and understanding on that. So often people want to know just location X or location triangle. Why are there so many advisories at this location on the beach? We get the question a lot. Why is there an advisory here? What's happening? What is the causal factor for that particular area? Well, if we sampled during a massive flood event or rainstorm, it's a little bit more of a no-brainer. It's like, okay, this is flood water. We have contaminants flushing in from upland off the island, as well as from nearby rivers and creeks and streams, possibly groundwater intrusion as well, moving contaminants. Um, but often we are seeing these observations during dry weather. So the question is, why are there so many advisories? So it's an easy question to ask, but a very difficult question to answer. So let's talk about influencers. And uh, there are many different influencers. So we have to talk about, okay, if we're at a sample location of sampling the water at one specific spot, such as right here at this triangle, the water that we're sampling is not necessarily emanating from that particular location. It is more than likely coming from an adjacent location, not at that particular site. So we have channels. We have 12 major and minor channels along the Gulf. And often we've modeled this, but you can also see it visually here. You see the darker areas, both to the left. It almost looks like a giant arrow. What we've observed is gyres forming. So if there were a contaminant moving from the upland area through the channel, often we see it gyre and then come and mix along the adjacent beaches and then move along the beaches in one direction or another, pending prevailing currents and winds. So that's tagging into our nearshore currents. If you've been to the beach, you set up your umbrella, you get out of the water, you set on a floaty, and 5 minutes later, you're 30, 40, 50, 60 feet away from your current location. Well, the contaminants are moving right along as well. We also have influences from some high pressure or low pressure climate systems moving in, and this is a depiction on the left from the modeled from the Water Development Board. This was looking specifically at an event we were investigating over 4th of July back in 2019. And so what you see here with this particular model simulation is you see strong currents moving up the coast right there. And then in this is earlier in the depiction, you see currents moving down the coast. So in essence, there can be a swashing effect where some currents might be driving a contaminant upstream or up the coast or down the coast one way or another. And again, this is just another influencing factor. Of course, rainfall is one that's very important, but we have not necessarily picked up or identified what is often a fairly regular occurrence, where if you have a stream or river environment, you have a heavy rain event, so you go from base flows, and then you go the hydrograph bumps, so you have the contaminants more densely concentrated in that initial upswing in the hydrograph, so you might have a first flushing effect. We have not necessarily observed that along the Texas coast, especially for these smaller storm cells that might just be over Galveston Island, versus a larger system that might be spreading across over a couple of counties where we are seeing that occurrence a little more often. Some of the other variables include, well, where is the runoff over the land? Where is it flowing to? And this is some more analysis from our AgriLife Extension Group, Gabriele Bonatti et al. And using a heat map approach, the darker lines are showing where more flow is moving down, and the lighter lines are showing less flow. So what we see here, in essence, for many of these Gulf fronting areas, the flow is moving away from the beachfront environment and then moving towards the bayside environment. And this is there for many different reasons. First, in this area, we have the seawall. If you've ever gone to the beach, you may have had to walk over a dune system. So the dunes in many areas act as a dividing line or a ridge line between the watershed. Everything behind the dune or landward of the dune is flowing bayside in many cases, not all cases. But this is a good example here of what we see in many different communities where we don't have too many discharges moving towards the Gulf. And that's also a policy as well. It's prohibited by policy, and there's some exceptions to that. Of course, in this immediate environment, especially in the seawall, for instance, in Galveston, everything flowing onto the seawall and onto the street in front of the seawall is moving Gulf side. We also have to talk about septic systems, and this is another model provided to us courtesy of Texas Water Development Board. We were investigating a particular instance, and we painted in a contaminant. Don't pay attention to the blue moving ball. And so we painted contaminants at one particular location. This was at the mouth of Freeport Ship Channel, just adjacent to Surfside. And so we painted contaminants in there. We were really curious to see if these contaminants, where they would be going under that specific set of conditions at that particular time. And in this case, we were actually very interested to see if the contaminants would move down the coast, and the modeling showed they actually moved up the coast. One thing that's of interest is on the left-hand side of these stars here, you will see septic system locations. So all these yellow stars indicate septic location, which are also influencing our water chemistry and water quality in the Gulf Coast. And this is just an example of how that influence might be occurring. Since we know statistically we are seeing increases in bacteria with increases in sea level. And Dr. Morgalet's study is testing out some different hypotheses to help us understand if the soil that used to be dry below these septic drain fields is being encroached upon by increases in groundwater. So when you have incoming tide, the head of that water is pushing the water inland. When you have an outgoing tide, you have the opposite effect where it's a hydraulic suction in moving that out. So in essence, you have a swashing type of effect with the high and low tides, possibly helping to transmit that shallow groundwater into the Gulf front. And Dorena, Dr. Morgalet has a whole presentation on that. It's really fascinating to see research she's come up with, along with understanding the groundwater contributions to nearshore. And I'm sure she'll share that with you all direct. Of course, when we talk about influencing factors, we have to talk about wastewater treatment plants as well. And there's 155 domestic wastewater treatment plants along the Texas coast and the coastal zone. And sometimes it's not necessarily the plant that there are problems, but each one of these plants has tens or hundreds of miles of pipes underground, sanitary conveyance. And so in these pipes, when we flush, take a shower, etc., all that sewage is moving through these pipes, which in many cases are cracked and riddled just due to long-term maintenance and sometimes design. And we queried a TCQ database just to look at sanitary sewer overflows and unauthorized discharges. And these records are maintained by treatment plants, and they are reported to the TCQ. And these pipes that are sometimes cracked, it's called infiltration inundation, in which is the primary cause, at least based on what's reported from this data set. And so many treatment plants right now are trying to shore up their systems because when it rains, that rain is intruding into the sanitary conveyance. And then that rainfall is then in the conveyance system. Then that goes to a wastewater treatment plant. Then their volume for capacity is it's beyond what that system can maintain. So then they have to basically let that water through and do a bypass. So if water's getting in, water's getting out. I want to talk about the uh, amazing Mother Nature. And from time to time, we have the opportunity to make observations in living laboratories. Every time we get this opportunity, we seize it and collect data. In this particular instance, there was a jurisdiction who was modifying a beach parking area because when it rained, the rain was inundating some of the parking spaces. So what they did is they regraded it and created a moat, if you will, or a detention ditch. The detention ditch is on the left-hand side of your screen with the green pipe going into it. There's a walkway to the right you can barely see. And so we tested the ditch, stormwater parking lot stormwater detention, and that came in at 860 colony forming units in Terracoccus. We tested the end of the pipe. That came in at 2,900 colony forming units. Then we walked away 10 feet from the pipe and we sampled there, and it diluted out to a 5 CFU is basically a non-detect. It was less than 10, so we called it 5 for the purposes of this discussion here. So we've seen this type of example. We've had 4 different instances of living laboratories where we've collected this data. Each one of them is showing something very similar, where we have higher concentrations in the source and at the end of pipe, but then the dilution of the contaminant is very significant. And so it underscores, when we are observing these higher bacteria values over time in various beaches, it underscores how high the concentrations are as they're not diluted, or as we're collecting them and identifying them even as they are being diluted and chewed up by the Gulf of Mexico. From time to time, when we're able to locate the haystack and then actually identify specific possible sewage contamination, this is part of what it looks like when we're doing the investigation with local jurisdictions. This is a storm drain. It had not rained for quite some time, and yet it has water in here. So we're really curious about the source of the water. Where is it coming from? What is its salinity? What is its composition? How much bacteria is in here? And in using this type of an approach to then identify where they can send a remote controlled robot up, and they can take video and then identify any potential leaks or look for heat signatures. Long story short, this data is complex. It's difficult to decipher. We have a lot to learn. We have some insights, but they're very difficult to tease out. And particularly when it comes to what specific actions need to occur to resolve some of these long-term pollution water quality issues. So some lessons that we've learned is, first off, nothing happens without a relationship and trust. And you're not going to talk to one single jurisdiction anywhere who wants to raise their hand and be proud of having issues. You're not going to talk to any of them who want this stuff to continue, but it can be quite expensive, or they have enough things on their plate where everybody's already over inundated with current workload. So sometimes it takes building relationships and the trust to be able to engage with the people who are influential and can be a local champion to help us understand what's going on. And when this makes the press, it never really looks good at the local jurisdiction level. So it can be very difficult to get traction depending on the type of problem and issue that is occurring. Trying to navigate amongst city management and the priorities. Every single coastal jurisdiction is inundated with day-to-day operations, and sometimes talking about water quality or non-point source pollution. It's hard to make the top of the priority list. We want to squeeze our data as much as we can and maximize desktop analysis to then help us focus our field work. Sometimes in doing upland work, you have the opportunities to generalize findings and then apply them elsewhere. What I've found along the Texas coast, this cannot be done at all. Anytime you overgeneralize, which is almost any statement applied to another area other than what you're studying, all it's doing is just leaving you open to potential problems and issues and faults in your thinking and logic. Each area is very specific. It's almost like if you've watched a soap opera, and if you haven't watched a soap opera, that's fine, but maybe we have parents or moms who watch soap operas. And as a kid, I remember Roman in Days of Our Lives. I mean, you each of those soap opera stories has an intricate set of details and it's woven in amongst all these various characters. And it's very applicable to land use interface with water in that each little tiny locale of this 5 million acre coastal zone, each locale has its own separate soap opera occurring. And it's important to try to understand these individual areas and be able to focus where you can and try not to overgeneralize. Over time, tropical storms, they come in and they rearrange everybody's priorities. Doesn't matter what you have going on. Response, getting a community back up and running and establishing infrastructure is going to delay your project for months. Finally, nod back over to Dr. Morgulets. And it's I think it's a 1908 ruling on groundwater, but a judge called groundwater mysterious and occult. And understanding groundwater influences and bacteria, it's still very mysterious and occult. So much so that the coastal bacteria actually behave paranormally. And yeah, I did look that up. They fit the definition of paranormal perfectly as they can be somewhat fickle in their behavior traits and difficult to understand based on their tendencies to adsorb and bind themselves to sediments and particles and fall in and out of the water column, etc. Okay, so we have gone through 1 through 4. Here we're on 5. So we have several ongoing studies occurring. Mentioned some of them here, but we started a new study earlier this year with the University of Houston, Dr. Hanadi Rafai. Very interested in understanding hydraulic connectivity between some of these known sources of infrastructure and to determine where that sphere of influence does and does not exist. So it's kind of a proof of concept that we're going to see if we can bring a monitoring team, combine it with a modeling team so we can collect real world results and correct the models. And then to understand, do we have connectivity between some of these different infrastructure systems, waste systems to the beachfront environment since they're all located bayside or upland? We have an ongoing project in year 2 doing artificial intelligence forecasting with Philemon Guillermo. I hope I didn't butcher his last name. Philemon is pretty incredible in what he's been doing with our AI forecasting of Texas Beach Watch. So far, the results are exceeding our expectations, and we're seeing a high level of accuracy being developed through his modeling in the 93 to 96% accuracy range for numerous sites, not for all of them. So this is still going along really well. We're hoping to be able to provide that information to the general public in the coming years on our website. That's it.
Thank you, Jason. I like your infographic.
He's ripped, huh? What's that guy doing up there?
Yeah, looks really good. Realistic almost. Okay, anybody, any questions? So Jason, if you were to pick an area of interest where more in-depth analysis, like you were talking about having different areas, having different factors impacting the occurrence of bacteria, where would you say that the least studied would be?
Well, you know, we're always looking at the squeaky wheel, figuring out which of the areas are problematic. You know, it's a good question. I kind of struggle maybe a little bit to address that, and there's many reasons for that. I mean, first off, there's a lot of ongoing study and work being done, so I'm just going to just answer the question just as direct as I can. Right there in your own backyard, Corpus Christi Bay has had a number of sites with long-term water quality issues, Coal Ropes and Ponish Park. As we move, well, let me eat my words for a second. I'm actually really interested in why does City of South Padre Island have improving water quality conditions over time, which is something I've really kind of piqued my interest. And they're quite remarkable and what's going on over there. But definitely, personally, I'm very interested in learning more about that. But when it comes to something that like, okay, how do we improve a problematic area? Okay, so those Bayside sites there that I just mentioned. In Palacios, Texas, Bayside, this is in Matagorda County. There are two sites at High Peak Use Beaches there that have had long-term problematic areas. Matagorda County Gulf fronting has several sites that are elevated in bacteria, so those are also pretty problematic as well. Basically, all the sites in Matagorda County, there's an issue right now with elevated bacteria. Mentioned Sylvan Beach, that's in Harris County. There's two sites in that particular area. They certainly stand out as being really unique. It is one of the most complicated water quality scenarios I've ever looked at. And I do use the word intimidating. It's like being next to like the Incredible Hulk or something. When you look at the area land use and all the influencing factors moving down, certainly of interest. Those would be the tops.
Okay, thank you. In terms of data availability, they all span back to 2010, I believe is what you mentioned?
Yes, we have data readily available back to 2010 up to the present. And we have identified some older data as well. It's not digitized yet. It's been collected in numerous areas, as well as a whole new long-term data set from PINS, Padre Island National Seashore, which will be quite interesting to look at that as a possible consideration as a control site, as they have very limited construction and human influence out in that particular area. But yes, the data can be made available. Lucy Flores at the agency would be the direct person to contact to inquire about getting that data.
Sounds good. Thank you. Anybody, any questions for Jason? Do you know what kind of information is included in the A model that you mentioned that's done by Hard Research Institute? What kind of variables are they looking at?
First off, I think you ask a model and they're going to want every piece of available data, but then the big question becomes is what can you get that's automated? What can
Yeah.
you get that is regularly occurring and that we can count on, that we can ingest, so to speak. And so salinity is the heaviest influencer and driver that from the model. And then rainfall is also playing a heavy role, but it looks like salinity is a primary driver of bacteria based on AI model responsiveness.
Okay. Okay, thank you. All right. Cody, you have a question? I see you leaning toward.
So I know we have the project that last your cohort had already started working on, but is there anything else ideally you'd want us to try and produce for you as like a product that could help you out with your current work?
I I appreciate the question, Cody, and I'll part of the context here is I'm leaving the agency in a couple of weeks. I'm retiring, moving into contracting work and private practice. So it's kind of hard to speak on behalf of the agency, but generally speaking, beyond myself or beyond my agency in looking at the regulatory apparatus, which is the TCEQ, the state of Texas, in its endeavor to rehabilitate impaired waters, um, are going to be looking and are looking for answers as to what's going on. So I would say that the 3D list would highlight particular sites of interest and concern, and that'd probably draw me back over to Matagorda. If you all think that there's juice to be squeezed, so to speak, from the Corpus Christi base sites. And we did start a project here more recently looking at water quality and groundwater contributions in at a couple of bay locations. I mean, that is very much of interest, but some of these areas have been looked at for over a dozen years. And there haven't been a whole lot of very specific answers as, okay, what do we do to treat the particular issue? So I would definitely steer towards some of the areas with long-term water quality issues.
Okay, thank you for joining us today, Jason. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.